All righty, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know Emily will be helping out to let more people in the room as they join. Thank you everyone for coming to this evening's Ask Me Anything event. It's truly an honor to be here to facilitate the conversation on feeding tubes and nutrition. And an extra thank you to our panelists for volunteering their time and energy tonight and for being so willing to share openly about their experiences surrounding feeding tubes. My name is Blake Johnson. I'm the Outreach and Inclusion Lead at I AM ALS and tonight's conversation facilitator. And I also have the privilege of running our Ask Me Anything ALS event series. So I'm really glad that you're all here tonight and maybe you're putting a face to a name for the first time as you've received many emails from me in the past. So what is and who is I AM ALS? We're a patient-centric movement revolutionizing how to end disease. We provide critical support and resources to patients, caregivers, and loved ones. And we also empower advocates to raise awareness and lead the movement against ALS in driving the development of cures. Ask Me Anything ALS is not just a fun social media trend. This was actually an idea born out of the ALS community, where ALS advocates come together to answer questions from an audience of people who are interested on a specific topic. So again, tonight being feeding tubes and nutrition. I'm going to go through just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As you saw, the event is being recorded tonight, and we'll share the recording after the event, along with a comprehensive resource that includes information that was shared both at the first event and then also shared tonight. And that will also include the recording from the first event too. We encourage everyone who's here tonight in the audience to use the chat feature to join the conversation. However, we won't be reading the chat again, like we have before in other I AM ALS events. Any questions that are submitted in the chat will be pulled by Emily from I AM ALS and then added into our list of questions to ensure that we don't miss anything as the conversation continues. If you wish to remain anonymous, though, when you submit a question, you can direct message that to Emily Johnson. And she'll make sure that your question also gets added to the list of questions. You can also use the raise your hand feature to participate in the discussion tonight, to share your own experience or to help answer a question. We want to have this be as conversational as possible. So if you want to chime in, you are definitely welcome to do so. If you use the raise your hand feature, I will call on you and in the moment as well. So to do that, you will just click on the reactions icon and then click raise hand. And the last thing just is please mute yourself when you're not speaking, and this will allow for the discussion to flow without any interruption or background noise. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Mackenzie, our ALS support specialist, who's just going to share briefly about her role tonight and at I AM ALS.
Hi, everybody. Like Blake said, my name is Mackenzie, and I am on the ALS support team at I AM ALS. The ALS support team is here to provide you all with helpful information or to help you access ALS related resources, and we're here to provide emotional support as well. If you're needing any type of ALS related support, we'd be honored to talk with you. You're welcome to reach out through Zoom tonight by direct message, or you can also email us if you'd prefer. And I will drop the email address in the chat once I'm done speaking. And I'm here tonight to support you all. I may share some resources in the chat as we go along tonight, or I might direct message people if it seems like we may be able to help you in some way. You're welcome to DM me or direct message me if you'd like me or someone from my team to follow up with you after tonight's event. And I also wanted to note that Blake and Emily and I we will all be collecting the resources that are shared out tonight, and we will send you all those resources over email sometime in the next week. So I will drop some links in the chat, and I'll give it back to Blake.
Thank you. And Mackenzie was also the moderator last time, so I hope I can live up to the amazing job that she did. But that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to share that we've divvied up the questions by topic to help organize the conversation where possible. So we'll first talk and answer questions that were on the decision-making process and the procedure. Then we'll continue there with cleaning and maintenance. We'll move into feeding and nutrition, and then some of the miscellaneous questions that we got as well. So we will get started. Our first question is for you, Bob, and this one is, my dad has ALS and is FVS values are already very low. Is it too late for him to get a feeding tube and be put under anesthesia? And then there's kind of a part two to this. He's resistant to the idea, but he also hasn't really discussed it with anyone. So I don't think he's very informed at this point.
Okay. I'm happy to give our experience on this. I know when my wife first got ALS and they started discussing feeding tubes, we heard that you really needed to get it before your FVC was below 50%. And at one point in her progression, it very quickly went from above to below, and it was a big surprise to us, and we were quite worried about whether she could get the tube. And we found out that you can get it at lower if you, at certain hospitals, they can do it with what they call a RIG, radiologically inserted gastrostomy tube. And so Beth actually got hers done when she was only at 30% on forced vital capacity, and the procedure went fine. I will say though that we probably wish she had got it a little bit earlier, because other things can come into play. Even though they have a procedure that can do it when your breathing's compromised, you might have more anxiety later in the progression and so on. So certainly would recommend earlier.
Thanks, Bob. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in on that?
Hi, this is Sarah Lupino. I'm a nurse practitioner at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And so I'm here with a more like clinical hat on to help answer any questions. And I help conduct a lot of the pre-op visits and help counsel folks who are thinking about feeding tube in the clinic and help people manage their feeding tubes too. And I would just add on to Bob's great response that, yeah, we do use vital capacity as one of our markers for timing on sort of when's the right time to think about getting a feeding tube if it's something that someone wants to do. And 50% is the number that the literature shows that as the vital capacity starts to fall below 50%, we know the risks related to the procedure and going under anesthesia tend to go up. So though it's not, like Bob was saying, not necessarily prohibitive, we know that the risk profile is much lower when people are above 50%. So that's one of the big markers that we look for when we're trying to guide people on timing. And I would say there are some people that I talk to about feeding tube or will bring up in the clinic who are initially like really hesitant about it or sort of say, I don't think I want this. And we always try to give them information and at least kind of, I say, can I just give you my spiel on it? Because I want to make sure that they have all the information so that they can make an informed decision about it. Because sometimes people might have misconceptions about feeding tube or might have had a family member who had one years ago, and things might be different now, or the framework might be a little bit different in the ALS disease population compared to somebody else. So if people are a little bit hesitant to learn more, I try to open it up a little bit and give them some information if they're willing to hear it to help them make the best decision for themselves and their family.
Thanks, Sarah. I think you said something really key. The informed decision is something that we're hoping that people can make after hearing from people who have experienced this themselves in the event. So that's all we're hoping to do, is provide as much information as possible tonight from various perspectives and experiences, that you guys have the information you need to make these decisions. Our next question, I'm going to open this up to all of our panelists. We did not have anyone who indicated they wanted to specifically answer this one, but the question is, I'm getting a feeding tube on March 7th. What things can I do or ask that will make this event very successful? And I will say that Mackenzie just dropped our questions about feeding tubes, which I was going to ask her to do anyways, which is a great list that can help you as you are preparing for the procedure. But I will pass it now to our panelists to see if there's anything that comes to mind immediately for them.
Yeah, Sandra wants to respond to this, so she'll let me know if you can't hear her computer. So here she goes.
If you have bulbar ALS and are having a feeding tube surgery, ask for pillows to prop under your head and torso in the operating room.
Did you guys hear that? So I agree with that. I think our experience in a large teaching hospital having her feeding tube placed was interesting in that typical ICU, they want to put you on oxygen, they want to lay you down and all these things, which ALS patients don't necessarily need. And so I think just being an advocate, if you have a caretaker, a friend who can be there with you and advocate for you if you can't speak, or if you can speak, you may need to advocate for yourself. But Sandra doesn't lay down well, and many ALS patients don't. And so encouraging the staff in the ICU to, could you prop her up? Could you raise the head of her bed a little bit? Could you put pillows under her shoulders or under her head? Anything to make her comfortable. And then the oxygen need is a discussion to have, but it's like most ALS patients don't need to be on oxygen and actually can be counterproductive. So.
Thank you, Wade and Sandra. Anyone else from our panel or from the audience?
See,
Oh, sorry, Sarah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say communication, Julie. Just trying to let people know what the best communication strategy is for you as a patient. If you use like a boogie board or a device, making sure that everybody knows and that they let you have that with you during your stay, because you might be moving from place to place throughout the hospital.
I agree. And can you all understand me today? Okay. My input, because I'm a woman and I have to share this, is if you can, and the doctor can, because it depends on where your stomach connects best, whatever. But ask him to put it not right under your boobs, because then it gets in the way. And so, and you have to, I tried like 10 different bras before they actually fit and found one that was comfortable. So if they can't do it, I would ask them to do that, if it's physically possible.
Thank you, Julie.
You expressed from the audience we could participate. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to use if you'll just use the raise your hand feature, because I see Bruce's hand is raised, and then I'll get to you after Anne. So Bruce, go ahead, and then I'll go to Anne.
My wife just had one on January 3rd. I think that what we had is everything about said with the pillow was 100% correct. But I think you need to make sure that before you leave there, you have a good understanding of how to maintain and use that feeding tube. What happens if it gets clogged? What do you do? How do you feed it? What's right? What's wrong? Cleaning, maintenance of the tube, making sure you understand how the syringe goes in to, make sure that, when you're feeding the supplement in there. I think the practitioner or the one will handle the nutritional part of it, but it's the maintenance part, what to really expect. Make sure you understand that, and that more so that the person who's with you is there to help you understand it. So when you get home, that was because we did make a couple of calls after we got home with it.
Thanks, Bruce. That's really helpful. Anne?
Super. Thank you, Blake. I have been a caregiver, and my best friend had bulbar ALS, and I've been engaged in the ALS community intimately for 3 years. Most of my friends are bulbar ALS. My observation has been, number one, there's a lack of information of understanding the caloric burn of a person with ALS. I'm sitting here all day. I don't burn that many calories, but a person with ALS, due to their fasciculations and all the things going on in their body, they're burning what could be running a 10K. So I don't think people understand that the feeding tube is number one, because the caloric need and the hydration is essential. Number two, getting it sooner than later allows the family and the person who is getting the feeding tube time to transition from the ability to eat and swallow to also supplement and get used to the feeding tube. Also, number three, sometimes people wait and they may not have that ability to get that feeding tube. It's the woman who's pregnant. I want to have a baby naturally. And all of a sudden the pain gets too great and then they can't get the epidural. Some people have waited too late to get the feeding tube. And so with that education of the value of the feeding tube, it's not as difficult, the ease of it, and there's other ways, the kangaroo pump, the ability to have food over extended time. There's so many assets to have a feeding tube, but sooner than later to get that quality caloric needs met and the ability to use it. Anxiety is nothing but ALS. So getting it sooner than later also reduces that anxiety and reduces that stress that comes with choking and aspirating. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Anne. It looks like Sandra's like, absolutely, always agreeing. And we did have
my friend.
We had a good discussion on that in the first event too. So while we don't have as many questions on that specific topic or the proactive or getting the feeding tube proactively, I know Mackenzie just dropped the link to the recording for the first one. So if people do want more information there, you can find some of that in the recording for the first one, or there's resources on our site. You can also connect with our ALS support team for more information on why getting a feeding tube proactively can be really beneficial.
And I can tell you that I had mine for 7 months, and all we did was clean, do the water clean until I ended up in the hospital. And thank God I had it because they could feed me. So I never thought I could still eat. I still can eat, but if I hadn't had that, I probably would have died in the hospital.
Thanks, Julie. Always love your transparent answers. So valuable. No, I'm serious. All right, we're going to move into questions on the procedure itself. We have just two. So if anyone has a question on the procedure, feel free to drop that in the chat as well. So our first question for you, Bob: my healthcare aide won't be allowed to administer the actual feeding tube. The actual tube feeding, but there are parts of the procedure they can, let me just start over. Our document keeps moving. My healthcare aide won't be allowed to administer the actual tube feeding, but are there parts of the procedure they can help prepare in advance?
Unmute.
Thank you. I'll answer this from the point of view of what I think they should be able to do. We didn't actually use a caregiver, so I can't comment on what they officially say they can and can't do, because I did all that stuff. But my assumption is that the loading of the syringe or the gravity bag, which might include also making a homemade formula or something like that, and then all the cleanup, certainly should be something a caregiver could do. And honestly, those two things take a fair amount of time, so it would be a huge benefit if they could.
Thanks, Bob. Any of our other panelists want to chime in on this one, or also anyone from the audience, whenever people want to?
I would just add.
Sorry. So you and
Julie, we're on the same wavelength. You go first this time.
I use a private pay healthcare person, and we've taught her, just like my husband has to learn. So she knows how to clean it, she knows how to feed me, and bonus, I get my delivery off to a peg. I don't have to taste that crap.
That's great. I was going to add, in general, I have a few thoughts. In general, training caregivers on how to administer the feedings. What I hear from folks is that it can be daunting to think about as a caregiver before the G-tube's put in, but in general, it's pretty straightforward. Like once it might help to have, sometimes what we'll do is refer people to like visiting nurse. So have a nurse come out when you come home from the procedure who can help just like check in, look at the site, make sure you guys feel like comfortable using the tube and everything. But once you get the hang of it, people generally do just fine with manipulating the supplies and administering everything. And then sometimes you can train your private pay caregivers or home health aides to do it. But I have heard that there are some agencies that have like policies that say that they can't actually administer the formula because it technically falls under the category of like a medication and it's out of the scope of a home health aide. So that's where people sometimes run into trouble with like having the home health aides actually participate in the administration, but that's not consistent what I hear across all home health agencies. So sometimes it's a matter of just finding like the right fit and the right individual. And if you're interviewing home health aides, that might be an important question to ask, is like, what's your policy on helping with tube feeds up front?
Can I address this for you? My name is Dean Roberson. I'm here in Spokane. Our family owns the largest in-home care agency in the state of Washington and Oregon.
Awesome.
So this is our wheelhouse. In Idaho, where we also have a lot of caregivers, we have about 1,500. Idaho has hardly any rules, so they can do just about anything. Washington is one of the most highest managed of any of the states. So our caregivers cannot administer. They can do all the prep, like the good man said before. They can do all the prep. However, that is a nurse delegated task in the state of Washington. If you have a nurse that has a caregiver with that certain client, a nurse can delegate that task to an individual. But you're right, they can't do it without nurse delegation. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean, for being here and for providing that perspective. I love the various stakeholders that we get that come to these events. It's really valuable. All right, our next question is for you, Sarah. And the question is, how long is your stomach bloated after a feeding tube placement?
Oh, that's a good question. So some people have bloating after the tube placement and some people don't actually. So this comes from the way that they do the procedure. Usually we see this in a rig placement like Bob was talking about, where they have to take an image of the stomach and then they make an incision from the outside in to insert the tube. And so this is a radiologically inserted G-tube or an RIG or a rig approach. And so when they're taking an image of the stomach, they need to find a window to make an incision. And sometimes the stomach is hiding behind a loop of bowel, or like your liver gets in the way and they can't get a good bullseye shot at the stomach and feel confident that they're going in the right place and they're going to hit it. And so what they may have to do is what they call insufflate the stomach with air during the surgery. So puff a little bit of air into the stomach to blow it up a little bit. So just like you would have a big meal, your stomach can stretch, right? So they puff a little bit of air into the belly to make the stomach bigger so that they have a bigger target when they're going in. And the way that they do that typically is by putting a little tube in through the nose, a nasogastric tube. It's like a very thin, flexible tube that goes in the nose into the stomach, and they just use that to puff a little bit of air in. Not everybody needs that to have done, because depending on your anatomy, sometimes your stomach's front and center, and it's very easy to identify a window and get in there. Other times people need a little bit of that insufflation, and they need the NG tube to go in. And so if you do have a little bit of air in your belly, you could feel a little bit bloating, like after the procedure potentially. That should resolve pretty quickly as that gas passes, and shouldn't be too much of a problem. So that's something that, like, within the hours or so, like post-op, should start to resolve as your belly would pass gas anyway, naturally. And so another kind of cool trick with feeding tubes is that as you, in the days and months and years afterwards, as you get gassy and bloated, like we all do after a big meal with a feeding tube, one of the nice things that you can do is actually vent it, which means you can open it up, open the stopper for the feeding tube. And a lot of people will just add an empty syringe to that. And if you feel gassy, just let the gas escape out that way. And some people do that while pushing lightly on the belly or like repositioning. So it's called venting the G-tube. And it's a really great way to relieve gas and bloating, which sometimes people feel after a large feeding or a large meal. But generally it shouldn't be too much of an issue. There's also medications like Gas-X or simethicone that can be given to help with that as well. The clinical team could guide on.
Thanks, Sarah. Dean, did you have something you wanted to add, or is your hand just still raised? Just wanted to check in there.
I think he's driving, so I think his hand is just still raised.
All righty, Bruce, I see your hand just raised. I'm going to pass it over to you.
One of the things we experienced, I don't know if it's standard, when they put the PEG tube into her a few days later, I mean, she had a lot of pain in the stomach, and what we were told was going on is they put like a couple of fasteners around the tube as it's inserted. And what was explained to me is that as the healing process goes on, the stomach pushes against these fasteners. They eventually fall off themselves. And, you know, then we had, on my case, my wife had 3 fasteners. As each fastener fell off, the pain subsided. You know, originally called the doctor. He said, if you're uncomfortable, go to the operating room. I spoke to one of the ALS nurses, and she says, well, all they're going to do in the hospital is cut them off if it heals. So if you can bear with it. So we hung in there. We had like one stubborn fastener that took an extra few days. Just as I was getting ready to cut it off, it popped itself off. As soon as it popped off, the pain went away. But it's kind of a little mysterious as a newcomer. Like, what is this pain? Is there something wrong? It's just the healing process is putting pressure from the inside, causing that pain. So I would speak to your doctor before running to the emergency room, because what was told to me, you're going to run to the emergency room, they're just going to snip them off and you're going to go home. So, but that was the most, I guess I would say, the scary thing. As far as venting the tube goes, I mean, one funny story is my son was with us when we had it. He vented it and there was pressure in it. So when you do vent, be careful, because he got spritzed. So.
Thanks, Bruce. It's good insight there too as well. And I know we're going to actually move into the cleaning and maintenance questions. I think some of that might come up again. And Sarah did share some good information last time as well on that. So if you're interested in learning more, again, there's some information on the recording from the first event. So our first question for cleaning and maintenance is for you, Sandra. And the question is, I had a feeding tube placed in June 22. What is the best way to keep the button close to my body?
Yeah, I'll respond to that. So if if you have a G tube, which is longer and sticks out, you know, 8-10 inches or so, then there's a couple of ways you can deal with that. You can there are some things you can buy on Amazon, which are like a cloth band or a material band that you can put around your waist, and it will hold the you can kind of roll the tube into a circle and put it underneath that material, and it holds it close to your body, and it makes it, you know, you don't see it nearly as much as you might otherwise. If you've got a Mickey, there's really nothing you have to do because it's already close to your body. It's very small, and you don't really have to do anything to hide that. It's already pretty nondescript. But the G tube is definitely something that most people want to do something instead of just letting it hang down. They'll roll it and put a piece, like one of these pieces of material. I forget what they're called, but it's just like a band that you put around your waist, and it just holds it close to your body. Put it under your shirt, and nobody knows you've got it for the most part.
First Mickey was too long.
I think Sandra's
about a smaller size. It was more flush. The first Mickey she got was too long.
My first Mickey was away from my body. It was a little too long. Next time I got the smaller size and it was more flush.
Yeah, so the Mickeys come in different sizes, different lengths, and depending on your anatomy, you may the surgeon who places it or the gastroenterologist will make a determination about what size you need. If you lose weight and continue to lose weight around your waist, then you may need to go to a smaller size, but that'll be something you'll notice because it will just, the Mickey will stick out instead of being kind of flush against your abdomen. And at that point, you may want to go to a smaller Mickey when you change it, when it's time to change it.
Thank you both. We did have a question that came through in the chat that I wanted to go back to. It looks like Sarah may have helped answer it. Let's see if I can now find it. But I did want to just open it up to the rest of the panelists as well. Questions from Nancy. I had my surgery 3 weeks ago and still have the buttons in me. It's still painful if I walk too much. Is it because of the buttons that are still in me?
Yeah, I was saying that it could be sometimes, so those buttons are called T-tacks, and just like we were discussing earlier, they help to, they're like stitches basically. They help to pull the stomach wall up against the abdominal cavity, so that when they're inserting the tube, there's a nice flush tract for them to make the incision. And so they usually have to stay in at MGH. So everybody's a little bit different. So, but at MGH, we recommend they stay in for like a minimum of a couple weeks. And then some places recommend that you leave them in until they fall out on their own. And then other people say they have to stay in for at least 2 weeks and then they can be snipped out. Sometimes while they're in, they can get a little bit tight, like folks were describing, and that tightness can be uncomfortable. It can be more uncomfortable when people move. Also, sometimes the belly is just sore for a couple weeks after the surgery because things are still healing and you cut through layers of muscle and tissue. So, it tends to be more sore when people move around. So that's something that I would say check in with your clinical team on and see. Sometimes if they snip those T-tacks out, like you feel relief. I've taken them out for people before when they're really tight and people are just like, oh, I feel so much better, which is then it's the T-tack. Once in a while, it's sort of a matter of the type of tube or the fit, like Wayne and Sandra were describing, like if the fit of the tube is too tight, you need something that's a little bit different. That could be a different issue. So that's why it's good to check in with your clinical team and see what they recommend. But it could just be that they're a little bit tight.
Sweet, thank you. Our last question on cleaning and maintenance is for you also, Sarah. Sarah rocks. I'll just say that. We have a little smiley face for you in the chat. The question is, what should my process look like for cleaning and flushing my feeding tube if I'm not yet using it regularly? And then what does that process look like when the tube is being used regularly?
So for folks who get a G tube, like really prophylactically, like Julie was talking about, if you're not using it at all and you just are placing it proactively, at a minimum, you want to flush it once a day. We say with like, at least 30 mLs of water, like a syringe full of water, and you want to flush it to keep the inside nice and clean. And we call it patent, which just means open. It's like a medical term for like clean and open. For people who are using the feeding tube regularly, the recommendation is to flush before and after each feeding or administration of medications with water. And usually the recommendation is like 20 to 30 mLs minimum of water before and after you do a feeding or medications, basically anything that's not water through the tube. With that said, I think it was Anne who was saying that one of the key benefits of a feeding tube is hydration. So we say minimum 20 to 30 mLs of water, but you can do a lot more than that to help get your hydration boosted up too. And that can be a really great way to sneak in extra water as well.
Very helpful. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna move. Yeah.
Before we go off cleaning, can I make a comment? We talked about cleaning the tube, but there's also, the site and what you do around it. And one thing we found helpful, because we got sent home with the instructions, you just cut up some gauze or something and place it between the circle pad on the outside of your stomach and your stomach. We found these things online and I took a picture. I just wanted to show it. It's like a little circle pad that has a slit in it that just fits right over around the tube. And then there's a button actually. And they're so easy to use. It was so much easier than gauze. And they're like, it's $1.30 a day for those, but you can also throw them in the washer and then it's, almost nothing. But it just made that process of cleaning that site and getting things ready to go again much quicker. So I just wanted to share that.
Are those
cute?
Just throw them away at this point.
What'd you say, Julie?
She said, and they're cute.
Yeah, a friend of mine sent me a whole bunch of there's a bear, there's all kinds of elephants. They're really cute.
I love Bob's picture, like the depiction that is so helpful. And I know too, in the previous one, we had a short PowerPoint presentation too from Sarah on some stuff. So nothing helps more than being able to see some of these things and not just hear about them. So thank you, Bob. Okay, so we have a few questions on feeding and nutrition and weight loss. So this first one is for Sandra and Bob. And the question is, what method of delivery is tolerated best, meaning bolus, gravity, or continuous form of a pump? Any noticeable differences in transitioning from by mouth to tube feeding?
Would you like to go first, Sandra? Where I'll go while you're typing. Or, so I would well let me just start this way. We came home with no other instructions than using a syringe because our training was very, very short. But luckily my sister-in-law happened to be visiting, and she's a nurse, and her and my brother said, oh my gosh, we got to go get you a gravity pole and gravity bags. And they did that, and it was so much easier. So we did that because it was great, better for time management for us that way. However, I never looked into a continuous pump, and I wish I had, because the one, struggle was the rate, and at least on the gravity bags that we were using, it was just, there was no way to get it just right. And, unfortunately, sometimes it was too slow or too fast, and then my wife's stomach was upset. So it seems like the continuous pump might be a better way, but I don't have any experience with it.
Yeah, I guess I would respond and say it really is for the most part personal preference. I mean, so when Sandra came home, we had a home health nurse come out and talk to us about feeding methods, and he didn't really talk about a continuous feed at all. We were using syringes, and so you can use a syringe as a drip and control the rate by how high you raise the syringe above the site, and you can add to the syringe and just let it run in. That's one way to do it. You can actually use a syringe and use the plunger and push it in just gradually and slowly. I think you should, if you're doing intermittent feedings, which is what you're doing when you use the syringe and not doing a continuous feed, then you need to give at least 15 to 20 minutes per feeding, because anything faster than that, most patients are going to get an upset stomach. They won't be happy with it. They'll feel bloated. The stomach doesn't move it through fast enough. And so they become very uncomfortable. And so a good 15 or 20 minute is a good number, I think, to think about. In terms of the continuous feeding, such as the pumps and so forth, I personally don't have any experience with it. We didn't use it. I don't know that we won't use it in the future, but we're doing 4 feedings a day with Sandra, and we use a syringe, and we have like a quart Pyrex measuring cup that we put the food in, and we'll draw it out of the syringe, hook it up to the infit extension, and then just gradually push it in, and we'll listen to music, talk about the day or whatever. This infit syringe, and this is the extension that attaches to her Mickey. But and then that's what the 1 quart looks like. But it's really just I think it's a personal preference, and I think you can try different things if you want to. I don't think there's any reason you have to stay with one. But time wise, for us, a feeding from preparation, administering it, and then cleanup is 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes, and 4 times a day. That would be And we have in our, so my two daughters, and then we have a friend who is here with us during the day, who we've trained, and all of those people can feed Sandra just fine. Actually, one of my granddaughters feeds her, and it's not hard to learn to do that.
Thanks, Wayne. Bruce, I see your hand is raised. Maybe it was still raised from before, but Bruce, if you did want to answer, just let me know. But we're gonna move to the next section. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. A trip to Home Depot and some PVC piping, a little holder. We have a little, I made a little rack, which people think is hilarious, but it just hangs over the tube. I can adjust the height, like Wayne said, because we go usually with a slower rate. About 15 minutes is 20 minutes to feed her, but I don't have to sit there and hold it or that. And it's easy. And in our case, it was so simple. The aide actually says, let me do it. You can go do what you want, just pour it in. But I would emphasize it. I hook it up and I take it apart and I do the cleanings.
Bruce, you're gonna have to start selling those. It sounds really valuable.
And Blake, forgive me.
It's working great.
I did a hand clap. I don't know where the
Oh, sorry. I have my
Sorry.
screen. I have my screen so small. I'm missing some of our people, but go ahead.
But I think I did it wrong. But
Okay.
for my pal, she did use a cool backpack. And so here's the backpack. It's very convenient. And this is, you put the formula in here. This charges overnight. This is a continuous feed, unlike Sandra and Wayne, who I know, love you all. This is fabulous because when you go out to eat, you want to eat. You don't have to feel bad. You can be eating while your family's eating. When you progress in it, and I was the last 7 weeks of my friend's life, you can just dial back the speed and the pace. Or you're just not feeling good and your body is not processing your food, this is a great way to continue to get some of that nutrition and hydration, and you can dial it back. We went from 225 down to 125. It's based on time and speed. So you pay attention to your person with ALS, you adjust accordingly. But if you've got things to do with grandkids and places to go, get your backpack on. If you're in home, hang that sucker up. You'll get used to the beep. It's easy to do. I have no degree and I did it easily. So this is a Joey backpack and feeding system. Easy peasy.
Thank you, Anne. I'm gonna try to connect with you later just so we have that information and the name, and we can share it out after the event so everyone has access to
I'm going to
that.
make a video too.
Please do.
I will.
All right. I know we have quite a few questions for our miscellaneous category around working out and golf and activities. So I definitely want to make sure we get to those since we didn't get to some of them in the first event. We have a few more questions on nutrition, and then we'll move right along to our miscellaneous questions, which I'm really excited about. Our next question, though, in this category is for you, Wayne. And the question is, can MCT oils be added to tube feeding formula to help increase calories?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is be careful, because the MCT oils can very quickly cause diarrhea. And so if you're adding MCT oils, it's an oil, and it can really you can definitely add calories, and they're good calories, but you just have to be really careful, because you can end up with diarrhea pretty quickly. So if you do it, start with very small amounts, work up very gradually. And I think most of the MCT oils will have a recommendation of no more than, like, I don't know, a tablespoon or 2 tablespoons a day. I would pay attention to that, because that's probably based on you're going to get the runs if you do much more than that. So just be aware that, yes, you can do that, but if you suddenly start seeing loose stools, or your patient or your family member says, I got to go to the bathroom, then it could be the MCT oils.
Thanks, Wayne. It's really helpful. I'm going to go rogue. We've never done this before in an event, but well, maybe we have, but I don't remember. Our next question is on what feeding formula people recommend. In the interest of time and to give everyone a chance to chime in, I'm just going to ask that people put their response in the chat, and then we'll make sure that people are able to read through some of those responses. But the question, and I will also post that in the chat for everyone, is just what feeding tube formula do you recommend? So if people feel free to chime in the chat, we're going to continue on with our next question. And this one's for Sarah. The question is, what works to minimize mucus and secretions?
That's a great question. I just want to address one question in the chat just to go back to Wayne is what is MCT oils? And it's medium chain triglycerides. So it's like a high fatty acid oil supplement that some people take. Some people take it as like a supplement and then like a nutritional supplement or an ALS related supplement. And I'll say in terms of nutrition, it's not necessary to take an MCT oil from a nutritional perspective with a feeding tube because the formula that you'd be getting already contains all of the extra like fat, calories, vitamins, minerals, like everything that you would need nutritionally. But some people like to take MCT oils like as a supplement on top of that. There was some evidence coming out with sort of fatty acids and research in ALS. So it's a little bit of an early phase area of interest on the research side as well. But anyway, okay, I diverted. So to what was the question was about secretions and mucus. Okay, so one of the big soapboxes that I'll just hop back on for this talk is hydration. It's like the lowest hanging fruit for secretion management and is something that's very easily addressed with a feeding tube. If people with ALS tend to be a little bit dehydrated because it's harder to just get in thin liquids when you're having a little bit more difficulty swallowing, and when you're hypermetabolic, like people were talking about earlier in the conversation. And so if you're a little bit dry, what will happen is your secretions will get thicker. So it's really, really important to maintain good levels of hydration. And the feeding tube is a great way to do that by doing extra water flushes. On top of that, there's some other supplements or medications that your clinical team can help guide you on to help with secretions. So the two kind of big secretion issues that our patients tend to contend with this disease are like your thick phlegm that kind of gets stuck in the throat that's difficult to expectorate or cough up because those muscles are a little bit weaker. And then also, additionally, excess saliva in the mouth that can tend to pool and cause some drooling. And some people have more of one than the other, and some people have a combination, and some people wake up in the morning with dry mouth and they're drooling by the end of the day. So it really varies day to day from person to person. And so depending on what the predominant issue is, we'll treat that. So number one, I would say is hydration helps. There's also medications that can target the thick phlegm, like and they're in the family called mucolytics. A natural mucolytic is actually pineapple juice or papaya juice, has an enzyme in it called bromelain that can help break up mucus. I've also heard of meat tenderizing powder has bromelain in it, but I've never heard of anybody trying. If anybody's ever tried that, let me know. I've read about it. I haven't recommended it because I'm not sure how it'll fly, but let me know if you've ever tried it. But that has a natural mucolytic and is bromelain, pineapple juice. So some people, I'll say, try some pineapple juice through your G tube, flush before and after with a little water every day and see how it works for you. There's over-the-counter mucolytics and expectorants like Robitussin or guaifenesin that some folks will try. For the excess saliva, there's a family of medications called anticholinergics that help to dry up the excess saliva. So those are things you might have heard of called like Robenal or glycopyrrolate or atropine drops. So medications that can be taken by mouth, under the tongue, or through a feeding tube that help to dry up the excess saliva. So sometimes we'll do a combination of those to help manage the secretions. But I would say also like hydration and starting with some of the natural routes could be good. Some people with very very, very excessive, like saliva that's not responding to the medication management, may also consider Botox injections in the salivary glands as well. That's more of a sort of a last line that we'll do. We'll sort of try the medications and then escalate to there from a clinical perspective. But your clinical team can guide you on what the best treatments are. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has tried anything or wanted to add anything else to that.
I wanted to add that when I was having a problem with really, really thick mucus, normally my Yeti was filled with ice and then water. And if it's hot, if it's cold, it makes that mucus thicker. So now I drink a nice little spearmint tea to spearmint, lemon, and local honey, real honey. And then some other person, another Mayuri actually, she said it's there because I use a nebulizer sometimes. So she said just use saline solution in your nebulizer. And oh my God, it worked. So that's my input.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's you're right. There's nebulizers, saline nebs, and then there's also devices to help manage secretions too. There's cough assist machines and oral suction machines too that your clinical team can prescribe as well.
I have those and they're lots of fun.
I know there were some very seemingly science heavy words there. So we'll be sure to share some of that information in our resource guide in case people didn't get, if you're taking notes, you didn't get everything written down. I had to Google something as Sarah was talking.
Right. If I say something sciencey by accident, just tell me and I'll stop it.
All good. Our next question is also for you, Sarah. I know we touched on this in the first event as well, but if you could just share briefly, can you also be fed through the mouth while you have a feeding tube?
Yes.
Okay.
That's as brief as I can get. But yes, you can still eat by mouth with a feeding tube. That's one of the most common questions that I get, and it's a great one. Most of the people I speak with who have a feeding tube continue to eat by mouth as long as they feel safe and comfortable doing so. That's absolutely fine.
Perfect. And we did just have a question that came through the chat as well. And it'll be our last one on feeding and nutrition. And the question is regarding formula, are there any in powder form that are good if you need to travel or transport or ship? And that's a great question. So I'll open that up to all of our panelists or anyone who's attending that has experience with this as well.
I'll chime in and say that as I, and maybe Sarah knows of something, I do not know of any complete formulas that are in powder form that are easier to transport than the liquids. Now, there are things that you can get that will provide some calories and some nutrients, but in terms of when I say complete formula, what I'm really referring to is that it has all of your required nutrients, vitamins, protein, fat, all the things that you need for complete nutrition are contained in that formula. I don't know of any powders, and I have not ever seen any powders that are considered complete nutrition. I don't know if Sarah has anything to add to that or not.
Yeah, I don't know of any products either that offer the same level of like comprehensive calories, minerals, and everything. But I'll say that usually the enteral companies, like the companies that would ship you a monthly supply of formula, if you're traveling and you call them and tell them like I'm spending a week in Florida or whatever, many times they'll ship you like a supply. Like if you're staying there long enough, they'll work with you and they can ship you a supply at like your vacation address. So it's worth giving them a call. And then the other thing is it can be a little bit of a pain, but you can pack a carry-on with your formula and take it on the airplane. And a lot of times we'll write letters from the clinic for our patients, like letters of medical necessity that say that you're allowed to carry on formula if you need to administer a feeding during your flight, or that you can check a bag with your formula. It's medically necessary for you to travel with it. So that's something your team could also help with.
Yeah, and I would add to that you might think that getting through TSA with these liquid containers, generally we've flown many times and carried a backpack full of her formula because we use it in airports and restaurants and wherever we've gone and traveled. And generally they'll run it through the machine, but they don't have a problem with that. And I would agree with Sarah that yes, your company, like we use Lincare, and they're great about, we were in Florida for a couple of months at one point, and so they just shipped the formula to the address we were there. And so you just want to make sure that when you go back home and you call for your next month's supply, that you say, okay, I'm at a different address now, because we did have a mistake where they sent it to Florida again. We were already home. So yeah, I mean, flying is really not difficult with we carried a backpack on the airplane that was her feeding backpack. And so it had everything in it that we needed for her in terms of her medications, her feeding supplies, and we could use that in the airport restaurant while the rest of us ate. But actually did it on the airplane on the way to Alaska. It really wasn't an issue.
Tell the TSA agent.
Oh, one other thing, yeah. So when you're going through TSA, if you're going to fly, the TSA has a number you can call that is kind of like a what's it called? It's for people. It's for people with medical issues that are going to be going through the TSA. And if you call them 48 hours in advance, they had a TSA agent meet us at TSA and really whisk us through and made it very easy to get through with her wheelchair, with her feeding supplies, with everything. And they were extremely kind and really helpful. I can find, Blake, that phone number for you and get it to you if you want to post it later.
Always down to get more resources. And we have had a few conversations on travel before, and I have a feeling it'll be an upcoming Ask Me Anything eventually, because I know it could be really helpful. So maybe we'll invite you back, Wayne, to help out with that one too. But feel free to share that with me, Emily, Mackenzie, or whoever after the event, or even now. And did you want to add something?
Concerning the powder and the formula, I've not seen that, but some of my friends with ALS have been taking antioxidant powders so they can get a lot of the good quality nutrition in them. I highly recommend an Zenser magnetic spinner and a Ninja frother, like a beaker, and it can spin. You don't want lumps in your feeding tube. So the way to prevent lumps, if you're doing anything powder, protein powders or whatever, a Zenser magnetic spinner and Ninja frother. It'll get rid of prevent all lumps in your feeding tube on Amazon.
Beautiful, Anne. Thank you. If you'll DM those names to Mackenzie or Emily, that could be really helpful as well, just as we're collecting more information and resources. I do have one more question, and then we're going to move along to our miscellaneous section. And this question's on heartburn, and it's for Sarah and Bob. And the question, plain and simple, is what should I do for heartburn?
Just quickly, Beth had a lot of heartburn. She always had stomach issues even before ALS. So the thing that always worked for her was I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, ondansetron, or Zofran is the more common name. It just, if she was having trouble, she'd take that and it would take care of it. So that's my one suggestion.
There's lots of things that we can do to help manage reflux in the setting of a feeding tube. There's different reasons why people have reflux. So depending on that, we'll adjust accordingly. And sometimes it takes some trial and error. So sometimes the reflux is due to the method of administration. So like if the formula is going in too fast, it can back up. And if you have if you're prone to reflux, then it can back up and really exacerbate it. So sometimes we'll slow the rate of the feeding by using a gravity bag or a pump that it gives it much slowly over a longer period of time. and that takes care of the reflux just fine. Sometimes it depends on the formula. Like we might work with the company to try a different type of formula, which might agree with the person a little bit better. And then lastly, there are like medications, like Bob was saying, that we can prescribe that might help to adjust GI motility to account for reflux, or like reflux medications that people can go on, from like Tums to an acid blocker, that some people are on just because it makes them more comfortable with the feed. So there's lots of tips and tricks that we can use clinically to help manage that.
Thank you both. All right, and now as promised, we're going to move on to our miscellaneous questions. And our first couple are actually in the category and theme of staying active. So the first one's for you, Sandra. And it's kind of a two-ish part question. So can you do water sports such as swim or water aerobics with a feeding tube, and even a long one? And the second part of that question is, after you get the feeding tube, are there any other physical limitations for exercise? And that is a little bit more of a general question. So anyone else, feel free to chime in there.
There. Yeah, Sanders, are you ready? Yeah, she's got
I
something.
could get in the ocean and the pool, and I put a together patch on. That would be optional, but it just gave me peace of mind. They are large adhesive bandages that are used for wound barrier. I did not swim with the long one.
Yeah, so the short answer is that there's really not any significant limitations in terms of getting in the water, pool or ocean. I would obviously want to be in a relatively clean water situation, not so much a dirty pond, but because basically once that wound has matured and you've got a stoma that's basically scarred, that's just kind of a direct entrance into your stomach. So if you get in the water and a little bit of water gets in your stomach, well, it's kind of like you swallowed water, while you're swimming. So it's not dangerous, but I say avoiding really nasty water, which most people would anyway. That just you don't want to contaminate your stomach either with bad water. So yes, you can swim. Sandra used a Tegaderm patch just because she wanted to do that. You don't have to do that. And I think the limitation becomes what other areas the ALS has affected in terms of being able to swim. And Sandra was a competitive swimmer and had to really give that up fairly quickly just because her breathing was so compromised that it was just too hard. So I think you have to look at the other areas of your body that are affected by the ALS and make that decision. But from a medical standpoint, I don't think there's anything about the feeding tube that says, no, you can't swim. And I would say that's true about really any other physical activity you want. If you're a jogger or a cyclist or whatever, I think the limitation is more going to be your ALS and not your feeding tube.
Love to hear that, and definitely suggest staying away from dirty bodies of water there. And then our next question actually is for you as well, Wayne. And the question is, will I be able to ride a stationary bike or e-assist recumbent bike with a Mickey?
Yes, again, the Mickey doesn't really limit you. But for Sandra with bulbar ALS, it had affected her breathing to the point that riding a bike, a recumbent bike, was difficult because that recumbent position makes it harder to breathe actually. And an upright bike is easier to breathe. An e-bike is fine. I think just paying attention to your balance, your strength, the risk for falling is significant. I think we have heard over and over and over again in our visits to the ALS clinic, don't fall and don't lose weight, and don't fall because recovery from a significant injury with ALS is very, very difficult. And so I would just say, pay attention to your abilities and probably be quick to say, it's probably not safe for me to ride an upright bike anymore. That's all I would say.
Got it. Thank you, Wayne. And this next question is our last one, kind of on sports and staying active, unless we get any others through the chat. And I'll open it up to the group. I think we've kind of gotten an answer here on part of it, but how long should I wait to golf after surgery?
In general, I would say as long as you feel ready to go golfing, like listen to your body, then get out there and go golfing. Usually it takes a week or two to feel fully recovered, though I would welcome others' thoughts and experiences on what their recovery was like, but that's sort of generally the recovery period that we would anticipate for people. And then you should be back to your typical activities by that time frame.
Yeah, I would say pay attention to your body and pain. If you're still having a lot of soreness, golf with the rotation of your trunk is going to be uncomfortable for a while. And I think by the time you're comfortable enough to go golf, you're going to be fine.
And Anne in the chat says, start with putt. Love that. All right, our next question. This one's for Julie and Bob. And it's a really great question, and we'll have a little bit of an intro before it. So my friend with ALS has his feeding tube surgery scheduled, but remains reluctant to give up and worries that it will remove the enjoyment of eating. He has no swallowing difficulties, but has lost about 50 pounds. He is skeptical of the encouragement that this will improve his quality of life. What is the best way to support him in this decision?
Well, two things. Remember, in ALS, it is their decision. So we can voice our opinions. We can say, hey, this works, but it is their decision. I got mine early, and I was at that when I first was diagnosed with ALS. I said, no feeding tube, no ventilator. And when I got my feeding tube, I would still have full use of my hands. I could eat out of it, but I knew that I made my feeding tube. Then I needed to get it if I wanted to maintain weight. So I did. And then, just you can provide him information, but I still eat and I still enjoy it. So that's all I can say. I'll let you take over, Bob.
No, I think you covered it well, Julie. And I would say for my wife's case, I think eating became more enjoyable once she got the feeding tube, because what the hurdle that finally pushed her over, I got to get it, was choking episodes. And, they just came out of nowhere. And then they were, the first time it happened, it was a shock to us. And then they were more frequent. And so then eating was scary, So once she had the feeding tube, sometimes we'd hook that up with some formula and she'd have something else to eat at the same time, it's something that she knew was comfortable for her, whatever it might be, particularly like mashed potatoes or something, so I think it might make it more enjoyable. And I guess what I would say, I think when looking back on it, there were like emotional hurdles to deciding to have the tube, and there were perceived tactical hurdles, like how are we going to do that, the tactical or practical side. And I hope, as you probably heard from everything today, the tactical stuff is easy. Once you've done it once, it's like boom. It's really not that hard. It takes a little bit of time, but it's not difficult to do. So it's more just coming to that realization, okay, do I want to do this, and am I okay? And it very well may actually be, to your specific question, it may actually help you enjoy your eating more.
Thank you both. That's really valuable perspective. I hope it helps that person in supporting their friend. Julie, this next question is for you. And the question is, I have hesitation on still feeling sexy with the feeding tube, bathing suits and undressing. I'm lucky that I still have the use of my hands and my legs. I just wanted to know if others feel this way.
So if this is a woman, women always think that we don't look good as a pair of jeans, as a pair of pants, but funny enough, our boyfriends or husbands think we're attractive sex. So I just say, if you're sexy, and just flirt, baby. Don't hesitate at all. And, you know, hesitate to buy it. I get the TMI, but it doesn't injure you.
If you're sexy, you're sexy. I love that. Wayne, did you want to go?
Sandra wanted to add something to the last question, and I wasn't quick enough, so I'll
All
let
good.
her play it here.
I had bulbar ALS and had the tube placed 11 months after diagnosis. I ate my mouth another 8 months after having a feeding tube. I enjoyed every bite of food, and I was glad for that time eating.
Yeah, and I think I said this last time, I think, but the anxiety of recognizing I need to get so many calories in. I got to get so many calories in. I've got to eat. And yet at the same time, the anxiety about choking and the struggle it was to swallow and eat enough. Once she had the feeding tube, that all went away. And it was like she could eat and enjoy it, have what she wanted, and still get all the nutrition she needed. It really improved her joy of eating because eating became a chore. And so once you remove that chore aspect of it, it becomes just enjoyable again. But and the only other thing I would say, and this is kind of a general statement, but I always felt like my role as a physician was to give people information with which to make a decision. And then they could make that decision, but I wanted to make sure they had good information. And so I would give them the information, we'd talk about it, we'd discuss it, but whether it was cancer treatment or whatever, but I respected their decision, whatever it was, even if it's the decision I wouldn't have made. I think once again, if we can give people good information and let them make a decision, then I think that's their choice and their decision. I think that's important, but that's an old doctor speaking.
Thank you, Wayne. It looks like we have Nancy agreeing that the anxiety of eating goes away when a feeding tube procedure and when someone gets a feeding tube. Anne, did you want to add something to that?
Briefly, my friend Kelly and her husband out in California, she has bulbar. Her having the feeding tube perpetuated them having showers together because he cleans her feeding tube in the shower.
Thank you for adding that. All right. Our next question, we're still in the miscellaneous part of things as we have just 15 minutes left. This one's for Sarah and Bob. And the question is, what are the limitations to getting a feeding tube or specific requirement, i.e. PFT over 60? And maybe this was better suited for a different category, so I apologize, but there's the question.
Sarah, you go ahead. I think I covered my inputs on that earlier about the breathing and the
Yeah, I think we mostly covered this one earlier, but I think I just reiterate that the American Academy of Neurology guidelines for timing on feeding tube and ALS recommends that that it's done when the vital capacity is above 50%, just because the risks related to the surgery itself tend to go up the farther below 50% the vital capacity is. There are no other clear guidelines set forth by the literature on like when's the right time to do a feeding tube or what are the limitations on feeding tube. And I think the sort of question there is like, when is it too late to get a feeding tube perhaps? So we're really So where that really leaves us is helping to guide the individual person based on like who they are as a person, what their symptoms are, what's important to them. I talked about this at the last seminar that we had, but just to kind of reiterate, I usually say there's 3 big drivers of timing for feeding tube that like I look for when I'm talking to folks in clinic. One is obviously the breathing, but the second one would be weight loss. So if somebody's losing weight really rapidly or really quickly, we think about doing feeding tubes sooner rather than later as a way to curb that weight loss, because we know that weight can be neuroprotective in ALS. And also because I think like some folks were referring to earlier, I'd say the more frail or like underweight people are going into a surgery, the more of a stressor that puts on their body. And I think the harder the recovery becomes as well, just personally, and seeing that happen. And then the third thing I would say is, obviously the swallowing too, for all the reasons that people stated. So as the swallowing becomes a lot more difficult, you want to obviously think about feeding tubes sooner rather than later, as a way to get in nutrition, but also again, from the surgery perspective, making sure that you're going into the surgery with a good nutritional status too. You're going in well hydrated with good, adequate caloric intake so that your body's ready to take on the stress of the surgery. So we try to counsel people to be a little bit more proactive and not reactive about when to have the surgery done, with the understanding though that there's sort of a window for people where they say, I want to do it when, many people say, I want to do it when I can see the utility in it and as a tool to help me and help make my day-to-day easier. A lot of people aren't in the super proactive bucket where they want to do it way, way early before they need it, which is understandable because it is a milestone and it can represent a lot emotionally for people. So we try to guide people as best we can on to do it sort of at a point in time when it starts to become a need, but again, not to wait until that window of opportunity is closed and it starts to seem like the risks are outweighing the benefits for folks.
Thank you for adding on to the original response. All right, our next question is, I'm going to open it up to all of our panelists. And I think we touched on this one a little bit last time as well, but for this group, will I be able to sleep on my side at night after surgery?
You should be able to eventually. It might be positioning just might be a little bit uncomfortable in the early days after the surgery because the belly is a little bit sore. So people might spend like a little bit more time on their back or, different positions than they're normally used to. Usually Tylenol, ibuprofen, kind of, typical over-the-counter pain medications in the first couple of weeks help with that. And then once the site is fully healed and people are fully recovered, sleeping on your side shouldn't be any problem. Some people like to tape the G-tube to the abdomen while they're sleeping too, because they're a little nervous about like repositioning and having it pull. So just for more like peace of mind, they'll tape it down when they're sleeping.
Awesome, thank you. And our next, actually, did any of our panelists want to add anything to that before I move along? No, okay. Cool. So our next one, and we've received a few more in the chat as well, is a Mickey feeding tube good, or what seems to be best? And actually what I'll do again here is just ask if people want to share their thoughts on this answer or sort of this question in the chat. I will drop the question in the chat and people can share their perspectives and their experiences on the question, is a Mickey feeding tube good, or what kind seems to be best? Because I do think, and panelists, please correct me if I'm wrong, it varies from person to person, but you guys feel free to chime in if I'm off on that one. And all right, we have 2 more questions that have come through, and these are actually on some of our nutrition stuff. So one is alcohol or putting Coke or soda into your feeding tube, is that going to be a problem?
I can take this, and then, or Wayne, do you want to start, and then I'll
Go ahead. I'll come after you.
Okay. Theoretically, anything you can take by mouth can go in through a feeding tube. With alcohol, we just say be careful about the volume that you put in. It should be a lot less than what you normally drink by mouth because it hits your system a lot faster. It's immediately absorbed by your stomach, so you're going to get that buzz quite quickly. So just be careful of that, like depending on your tolerance, half to a quarter of like what you would normally drink. And then soda can go through a tube. Soda water can go through a tube. Though I will say the jury's out for me on this because the Coca-Cola is a big debate amongst clinicians. We can get in like fist fights in the parking lot over this in nursing schools about whether or not you can put Coke through a G tube. Some folks say it's a great way to unclog a G tube if it gets clogged. Say you put your meds in there and it clogs up a little bit. The old school nurse trick is put a little Coca-Cola in there because it'll break up anything. You can dissolve anything with Coca-Cola, but there's some people that say that the Coca-Cola actually can bind with whatever's in there and make the clog worse. So there are other folks that say like, don't do Coca-Cola. It's actually not working. I used to recommend it to people and then I heard that. And now I sort of say, okay, the best way to unclog would be with a little bit of warm water. Some people do, into push pull with a plunger. There's other things we can try. Some people do soda water instead. I would say if you want to try Coke through your G tube, I would be careful about using it to unclog a G tube, but if you want to put it in flush before and after with water, I'm sure that's fine.
You can still have fun when you have a feeding tube, that's for sure. All right, another question we had come through is how much water may one drink via feeding tube? And I know we touched on this earlier. I think this person may have joined a little late, so I just want to see if you guys can touch on that just again real quick.
Let's see. So water intake through a feeding tube, you can get 100% of your hydration needs like on a daily basis through the feeding tube. If that works well for you. Some people drink their liquids by mouth and then do extra water flushes through the tube to get hydration. If you're using the tube for nutrition, usually what we can do, or what your enteral company, or you might have a dietitian in your clinic, but usually there'll be somebody who can help calculate your hydration needs in addition to your calorie needs, and they can draft up like a schedule. And so what we would do is take into account, based on your weight, how many milliliters of water a day do you need? Usually everyone needs around like 2 liters of water a day, but that counts also the water that's in the food that you eat and the formula in your G tube. So every carton of G tube formula has roughly like 90 mLs of water in it. So that counts towards your water intake. So with some fancy calculations, your clinical team can help you figure out how much extra water you would need to put through your feeding tube, what we call free water, to meet your hydration needs on top of what you might be eating and drinking by mouth or putting in through your formula, which I hope answers the question. And then just to clarify my previous question, people are asking about the Coca-Cola is the controversial thing. The carbonated beverages are okay to put through a feeding tube. In fact, the bubbles and like soda water are thought to perhaps help with clogs in a feeding tube. But again, the jury's still out amongst the clinicians on that.
Thank you, Sarah. Anne, did you want to add anything before we close out?
Piggybacking on Sarah, something very important that we haven't talked about, I don't believe in both, is that if you go to the ER, to the doctor, or to the hospital, they may not have your formula. One thing that is very helpful, always have a to-go ER stash of something, your syringe, if your screw cap, if your plunge, whatever, have your formula. But also, if you do get formula, for example, my pals, it was the first time, she had nothing and she was scared because it wasn't what she had. I took what they had and I added water to make it a little more diluted for her system, a little easier. So just word to everybody, have everything you need when you go to the ER and to the doctor. Just saying.
We ended up taking a Hoyer. The emergency room did not have a Hoyer. The ICU didn't have a Hoyer. So we took my Hoyer, my section, and my composite, and my respiration tube. So, yeah, they are not equipped for ALS. Can't be ready to tell them that's not what I'm doing.
Mackenzie,
Yeah,
oh, go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just gonna agree with Ann. I think, hospitals don't keep a supply of all the different feeding formulas out there because there are, gosh, I don't know how many, but there's a lot. So a hospital will typically have maybe 2 or 3 in their formulary that they have in stock. So if you end up going to the hospital for any reason, I agree with Ann, have a bag that has your feeding formula as well as your feeding tube materials, so that because I mean, when she was in the ICU, after her trach was put in, they said, bring your own formula. But we were there for 5 days and we just used our home formula because they didn't have it and they weren't going to get it. So take your own formula.
Thank you all. And Mackenzie, I'm going to put you on the spot really quick, and then we have one more question to get to. We love to put each other on the spot here at I AM ALS, but do we have a resource on the website about emergency preparedness and what to try to gather and collect?
Yep, I'm gathering it
Okay.
right now, actually, and
Right.
I'll send it out in resources.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so something on preparing or being prepared in case you go to the emergency room will be included in the resource guide that we share out after the event. So last question we're going to get to is also for the group. And the question is, if you already got a G-tube, can you change it to a Mickey, or is it too late? And I know we touched on this on the first one, but again, for this group, I'd love for us to share some information with the people who are here today.
Sure. So that is actually what happened with Sandra. She had a G-tube.
I had a peg for 2 months and then was swapped out for a Mickey. I like the Mickey better.
Yeah, she likes her Mickey better than the peg, but again, I think that's an individual, each person's an individual. But in terms of being able to switch to a Mickey if you have a G-tube, as far as I know, there's no reason you can't do it. We did it. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Once that stoma has matured, then it's a fairly simple swap out. So Sarah may have something to add to that, but.
No, that's true. Most people can get at MGH, typically you have to have the standard tube put in first. It's like the long one that hangs out. And then once that stoma, that hole has healed up, the swelling has gone down, the tract is there, it's nice and well healed. Then you can come back and have it switched out for a Mickey button. Usually they can't place the Mickey initially just because of the way that the Mickey's a little bit smaller. They need that bigger, longer tube to go in first to create a nice tract that will heal up well. It's sort of like the parallel is like when you get your ears pierced, you have to have your first set in for like 6 weeks. And then after it's all healed up, then you can start swapping out for your hoops and your chandeliers and all the other earrings that you want to wear. So the Mickey button is an option very, very rarely. And I always use this caveat. I've only had this happen in my 9 years in the clinic, like less than 5 times. Your anatomy is such that you can't have a Mickey button because the length of the button on the inside, some people's stomachs are so up high under their rib cage that they don't make a button that can thread up high enough under there. So they have to always have like the long tube. And we don't know that until we get in there and place the tube. It can measure the stoma length and make sure you're a candidate. So again, that's super, super rare, but I always just throw it out there. I don't ever promise anybody a Mickey button anymore because I've been burned before in that department. But usually after like 1 to 3 months, depending on the person, you can go in and have it swapped out. And it's a very simple swap. Usually they give a little numbing at the site with like a little lidocaine, and then it's done as an outpatient procedure. It's not under anesthesia or anything like that. You just take out the old tube and put the new one in. And I think that's everything I would say about Mickey button.
And I'll pass it to you, and then I'm going to close out today because we are at time.
Speaking from experience, have a backup part for your MIT key. My friend's MIT key broke, and it was a special part, and they never had it at 3 hospitals. So you get your MIT key, and whatever part you get that fits you, you have a backup with you, and get it changed about every 9 months. Trust me, you will appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining tonight, for asking such incredible questions, for chiming in with answers as well. And a huge thank you again to our panelists for joining us, not only for the first event, but for tonight as well, and for Bob being our new special guest for tonight. We will be gathering all the resources and links that were shared, and we'll be putting them in a resource guide, which will just be adding on to the one from the first event. So if you weren't at the first event, you'll still get information from that one along with the recording. Again, if you would like to connect with our ALS support team, Mackenzie and the rest of the group, you are more than welcome to. You can reach them at gethelp@iamals.org. That email will also be a part of our resource guide as well. If you have additional questions, they can help make connections to help answer those questions or provide additional resources. And Mackenzie's just dropped the email as well. So thank you all so much. We are so grateful to have you here, and we hope to see you at another event, or if you'll join our advocacy community or whatever it might be, we'd love to see you again, and hope to have you back. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.